Hello, I'm Dr. Saul Shaye. I'm a spiritual healer. What I tell people when I'm doing the healing, if they have a lot of things that they'd like healing for, try to pick your top 3 things. The simpler you describe it, the better, because God doesn't need the details. And it could be something physical. It could be something like you have a shoulder problem. You don't need to tell me it's a rotator cuff. It might be something like you have digestive troubles, and you might want to say a doctor calls it reflux, and it affects the esophagus also. Or it might be something emotionally that you want to describe as depression. Remember, I'm going to check everything, so it really doesn't matter if you list it all. But the more things people tend to list, the more they tend to block everything. So physically, I'm going to check your spine. I'm going to check the muscles, the joints, the bones, the discs. I'm going to check the organs, the glands. I'm going to check your lymphatic system, your immune system. I'm going to check the body's chemistry. I'm going to check the blood and your circulation. I'm going to check the hormonal system. I'm going to check your emotional body, the mental body, the spiritual centers, and old memories in the astral body adversely affecting the present. So you go ahead and either say it out loud or just list what your top 3 things might be that you'd like some healing for. I'm going to tune in, get some information, and then I'll let you know when I start the healing. Okay, I'm going to start the healing now. Okay. Now what I tell people is, when I'm doing the healing and God's working through me, about 50% sense something at the time. Things like heat, tingling, a sense of peace, a sense of love, a wave sensation moving over the body. 50% on the other hand won't sense anything at the time. But usually about 90%, notice in that first 24 hours after the healing, that the symptoms are diminished or gone. So at any given point in time, whatever the individual is allowing themselves to receive with the healing, usually manifest very, very fast. Now I think Spirit looks at these bodies very differently than the medical model. I think Spirit looks at these bodies that everything is an energy system, just like a little battery. So organs, glands, muscles, nerves, the emotional body, the mental body, these are all energy systems just like a battery. And when I'm looking at the person, I don't see problems. All I see are energy fields. And just like a battery, it's either full or not full. And if it's not full, I ask, is there something I can do with healing to help that work more efficiently? So over the years, people have asked me lots of different questions. Like, what can an individual do to help maintain the energy in these energy fields? Well, that's something I mentioned in my wellness lecture. If you want to learn about health, don't ask your doctor. The punchline being is work with your doctor, but 90% is up to you. So you have to eat right, exercise, detoxify, keep your spine in line. Emotionally, think good thoughts about yourself, think good thoughts about others, have some quiet time and prayer time daily. This makes up 90% of how we feel. And remember, spiritual healing is unconditional. You know, when Jesus did healing, he didn't take a case history of physical people. People came up to him and said, I want to see. And he said, you have it. Someone else said, I want to walk. And he said, you have it. And the only thing he told people that were aware of is he said, go and sin no more, meaning change your thoughts, change your actions, don't duplicate the problem. But spiritual healing is unconditional. People always ask me, does this drain me? No, because as a spiritual healer, I know without a shadow of a doubt, I'm not doing the healing. It's God doing the healing through me. I've learned how to stay neutral and let God do the work through me. So I've had to learn how to release the preconceived concept and the answer. And when I do that, it's then easy for spirit to flow through me. Now, people have asked me, how did this all come about? And to use a phrase I've used when I do the Sunday message at a number of churches, and the title was called, A Funny Thing Happened on My Way to Disprove God. I grew up in a ghetto in Brooklyn, New York. And my parents were Jewish, so I was brought up Jewish. But because it was a ghetto, I was very negative growing up in that environment. It was very hard for me to believe in spiritual things. So, you know, everything is in divine order. Gangs were always chasing me, but the more they chased me, the faster I got. I got so fast, I got a track scholarship to college. Everything is in divine order. So by the time I became age 20, I used to call myself an advanced atheist. What's an advanced atheist? That's a person who thinks he doesn't believe in God, but he also wants to argue with everybody who says that they do. Fortunately for me, God had planned for me. And on one cold November evening in 1967, I got on my motorcycle for my 30-minute ride home from Brooklyn College. 5 minutes from my parents' house, all of a sudden there was a steel wall right in front of me. And before I could avoid it, I crashed into a disabled trailer truck that had been abandoned on the highway in the passing lane. Now, I didn't black out and go into a tunnel and see the light. Instead, I found myself in the street, bleeding profusely and in a lot of pain. Strangely enough, I didn't have any fear at the time. All I could think of is my life was meaningless, let's just get it over with. I think that's when Spirit looked down and said, I think we need to teach the boy what can we do to help him become aware of the truth. And things started manifesting from that point on. A few hours later, they came back in, they did some tests. When I finished the test, they came back into the room. It was about 3 a.m. in the morning. And the doctor said, you know, all the tests have been negative. The bleeding has stopped. They gave me a pair of crutches and said, here's a pair of crutches, you can go. So as I limped out of the hospital, I said, things are going to be different. I knew that my life had been given back to me, and I thought nothing was ever going to be the same again. Well, even though I was injured and they said I'd never run track again, I didn't believe it. I decided I didn't want to live in New York City anymore. So I wrote away for a track scholarship to some of the southern colleges. Now, I was accepted both in Florida and in Louisiana, but I decided I didn't want to be in Florida because I had too many relatives there. So I decided to go to Louisiana. When I got to Louisiana, I was limping, and the track coach looked at me limping and said, you know, what's this? And I said, not to worry. And for some reason, I had absolute faith that I was going to heal completely. Well, within 6 weeks, I was running as fast as I'd ever run. Now, a few months after that, I was talking to entering a weightlifting contest, and I hurt my low back. That injury persisted for the next 3 years right into graduate school. Finally, a chiropractor helped, I was so impressed I decided to become a chiropractor. Off to Iowa I went, still thinking of myself as an advanced atheist. But one day a classmate told me he was going to go to a workshop to hear a psychic speak, and I said, if you're that gullible, I better go with you to protect you. Well, instead of protecting my friend, I started sensing something which I couldn't explain. So for the next 3 years, I kept on looking for answers. How was this possible? And finally, in 1975, I picked up a book which changed my life. That book was the autobiography of Edgar Cayce, There Is a River. I was so impressed by that book that even though I was brought up in a Jewish family and was calling myself an advanced atheist, I finished reading the book and went out and joined a Southern Baptist Sunday school. I knew that I needed to learn about the New Testament and more about the life of Jesus. Cayce also mentioned a lot about dreams, saying it could be a pathway to your higher self. So I started studying my dreams. Since 1975, I've recorded over 16,000 of my own dreams. These have given me information on almost every area of my life: physical, emotional, mental, and eventually it gave me insights into the healing. My first major dream on spiritual healing, I had a dream that I was in a church, and as I came out of the church, there was a gate with a lock on it. And I said, okay, lock. I made the sign of the cross and said, in the name of the Christ. And when I said that, the lock opened. And a voice said, look at that, we have Christ in our midst. And I said, no, I'm no one. I'm here to help him manifest the Christ. Well, I was at a conference and we were discussing dreams. I mentioned this dream, and a woman says, well, why don't you try making the sign of the cross over someone's spine as you're a chiropractor? And what did I say? I said, well, nothing's going to happen. It's just a dream. And she said, humor me. Well, I checked a person's spine, checked their legs. 95 out of 100 people, when their spine has misalignment and they lay down with their shoes on, one leg is going to be shorter. 95 out of 100 people, when the chiropractor aligns their spine, the legs tend to even out. So I checked the spine, did the healing. When I rechecked, the legs were even, the spine had lined up. I was so shocked, I said, I better not tell this to anybody, because I thought I'd lose all credibility. Well, that's how the healing began. And gradually, I realized since this wasn't me doing the healing, it was God doing the work, it could work on all things. So physical, emotional, mental. I saw a lady who was in a wheelchair with degenerative disc disease. And she showed me her lateral lumbar x-rays, and there was no disc spacing in the low back. So it was crushing the nerves going down her legs. And she had been that way for 3 years. She asked for some healing. I worked with her. Within a month, she was feeling so much better, she had her low back re-x-rayed. What the new x-ray showed was disc spacing in the low back. Within 6 months, she was back at work as a nurse. It was a 99% recovery. So amazing physical things, amazing emotional things. I think of the passage in John 9:1, because people always ask me, what's the purpose of spiritual healing? Well, in John 9:1, as Jesus passed by, the disciples saw a man who was blind from birth, and they said, Master, who did sin? This man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus' answer, neither, but to give glory to God. Yes, a funny thing happened on my way to disprove God. I didn't disprove God. I found God. So play this DVD as often as you feel the need for healing. If you feel there's a need for some more healing, you can always reach me by phone or checking my website and seeing where I'm going to be doing the healing in person. But remember the phrase, ye are children of the Most High. Ye are children of the Most High. God is your Father. So in the triangle made up of God, the spiritual healer, and the individual, God wants everybody to have abundant life. The spiritual healer, by definition, is neutral. So it's always the individual who can choose to receive fully, partially, or choose not to receive. 10%, notice no change at all. And Carolyn Meese in her work talks about the main reason people tend to block their spiritual healing is emotionally and mentally what we think about ourselves and what we think about others. So have a wonderful response. Remember, ye are children of the Most High. Blessings.